Welcome everybody, 12:31. Let's kick off our second webinar in the Geothermal UK series. Hello. In this webinar, which is the State of the Nation, as you can see on the screen, we'll get geothermal updates from across the country. Firstly, I'd like to thank Michelle O'Grady from the BGS in Northern Ireland for supporting with all the arrangements around this webinar and this webinar series, and also to Sam Mitchell, who's helping today. And secondly, I'd like to introduce you to our great speakers. Today we have Sharon Clements, Head of Geothermal Policy for the Department of Economy in the Northern Irish Government. We have Joanne McDougall from the Scottish Government, Geothermal Programme Manager. And in a moment, we'll start the presentations with Ashley Patton from the BGS in Wales. You can also see on screen Sarah Robinson from DESNES, who many of you will know. Sarah isn't actually presenting, but she will, when we come to the Q&A section at the end of the webinar, Sarah will be helping with answers, kind of overview answers, and particularly technical and R&D questions can be dealt with by Sarah. So thank you to all the speakers and the presenters today. As many of you know, this webinar series has been organised to inform the work of our industry and industry and government geothermal working group. The webinar started before the summer holidays with regulation and planning. Today, of course, we're looking across the UK, and next week, our next webinar on the 16th of September, we'll be hearing from some of our European colleagues to hear their perspective on geothermal. And the reason we're having these webinars is to collect information and to get a high-level overview of what's going on, so that when we have our next in-person meeting and we kickstart our work streams with the government and industry roundtable, we can leverage the information that we're getting in the webinars, and we can turn the learnings that the learning from the webinars into action to help us grow UK geothermal. In addition to attendees from this industry government roundtable group, we also welcome members of Geothermal UK to the webinar today. Geothermal UK is our new geothermal industry coalition, of course, and some other geothermal friends from around the UK. A couple of practicalities. The webinar is being recorded. The link will be shared at the end or in a couple of days, probably. Q&A, how can you ask your questions? You'll see a Q&A function at the top of your screen, hopefully. Please ask your questions there. Please provide your name so that we know who we're responding to. And feel free to ask the questions during the presentations, but we will answer them after all three speakers have presented. I think that's it in terms of practicalities and welcomes. Really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today. And so I'll hand over first to Ashley to hear perspectives from Wales, please. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, so I'm Ashley Patton. I'm an engineering and geothermal geologist for the BGS in Wales. So I work in the Cardiff office. Just trying to work out how to progress the slides. Okay, that seems to be done. So in terms of existing schemes that we have in Wales, we've got one mine water recovery scheme, which you can see on the map by the blue square, the dark blue square. We had one beforehand as well that's shown in the black and white square, but this has come offline now. We've also got the blue star down near Cardiff, which is the Taftwell thermal spring. So this is tapping into the Carboniferous limestone, but not using deep boreholes because, of course, the Taftwell thermal spring pops out in Taftwell, as you would expect, and that is being used to heat a primary school and a pavilion building. And then down in Cardiff, we've got an open loop scheme, which is shown, you can only just about see it sort of behind the pink dot. And that one is, it was operational for 5 years. BGS ran it for 5 years, and then it came to an end and was actually replaced with a gas boiler. However, the scheme is still there, so it could be brought online again at any time. And then the pink dot is a closed loop scheme, which is in the Senedd building down in Cardiff Bay. and that comprises of 28 boreholes all drilled to 100 metres. Now, of course, the reality is that is highly unlikely to be the only closed-loop system in Wales. In fact, I know of 2 more anecdotally in Cardiff, but the reality is because we don't know where these schemes are, we don't have any kind of register of them. Now, we've got more schemes coming online. The 2 pale blue squares were pre-feasibility mine water schemes. Now, those 2 did not progress, but I've been reliably informed that several others are going ahead. They're not shown on the map because they're currently confidential, but watch this space for those. And then we've got the Net Zero Terrace Streets, which is a scheme in Bridgend, which may look to include a geothermal heat network. And a pension scheme has recently invested in Park Iron, which is a housing development, which is going to have a geothermal heat network as well. Okay, I still can't progress these slides. Yeah. Okay, so we have plenty of potential in Wales for geothermal. The blue map shows you the open loop schemes, the open loop potential that we have in Wales. The light blue shows you where it could be suitable for open loop schemes. And then the other map shows you the potential that we have from the deep sedimentary basins. So we've got Carboniferous limestone down in the south of the city, and of course, at the south of the country. This is, of course, where our major population centres are as well. Okay, so these maps show you what heat could be extracted from a single borehole for both the open loop and closed loop schemes. And this is from our recently launched geothermal platform. Now you can see that we have the potential, as I said, in the south and a little bit in the north for the open loop schemes, but the closed loop schemes are pretty much available anywhere. And then this map is taken from the Mining Remediation Authority. So this is a mine heat opportunities map, which kind of shows you the areas which might be suitable for geothermal using mine water. And again, it tends to coincide with the south of the city, the south of the country, where you've got these major population centres. I just want to talk to you a bit about the Cardiff Geo Observatory. So this is an observatory which is operated by BGS, and it's looking at research into geothermal energy at a city scale before its development and hopefully afterwards as well. So we have 168 boreholes which are drilled all over Cardiff, and we took the temperature in these boreholes back in 2014, which you can see in these black squiggly lines on the graph. And you'll have to probably take my word for it, but 90% of the sites are up to 4 degrees warmer than predicted by the geothermal gradient. And that is because we have what is called the subsurface urban heat island effect. So this is where temperatures in groundwater in cities are elevated above the geothermal gradient as a result of having a city on top of them. And of course, cities are chucking out a lot of heat pollution, but they're also insulating the ground, reducing the albedo effect, reducing evapotranspiration, and all of that traps heat in the subsurface. So we took the average temperature for each borehole and contoured them to produce this thermal resource map. And this is really aimed as an advertisement for the fact that we have this subsurface urban heat island and that it can be used for geothermal energy. So although it's not strictly geothermal, it can be used in exactly the same way using ground source heat pumps. And of course, these elevated temperatures make those ground source heat pumps more efficient. So we developed this geo-observatory basically to sort of de-risk geothermal energy, but also to look at how that subsurface urban heat island effect works in theory at the city scale. So we developed a 3D geological model, hydrogeological models, heat flow models, and we instrumented 61 of the boreholes with fixed depth temperature sensors. And they've been recording at half-hourly intervals for the last 11 years. So we've really got a lot of data that we can build up to kind of create a picture of what the geothermal potential is like, and then see how that might change as a result of operating systems. So one of the things that we did was to install that ground source heat pump that I mentioned earlier at Grangetown Nursery School. And we operated that for 5 years. And I don't have time today to talk about the findings of that, but essentially we were able to prove that you could use the subsurface urban heat island effect as a geothermal energy resource. And we've got a paper published on that as well, if anybody wants any more information about it. So 25% of Cardiff sits on the glaciofluvial sand and gravel aquifer, which is filled with 28 billion litres of water, all at an average temperature of about 12 degrees Celsius. So that's quite a lot of geothermal potential just in Cardiff alone. And of course, this is quite likely to be the case in other cities that have shallow aquifers. And then at the other parts of the city, of course, you can also use the closed loop systems as well. So it's not just that 25% in Cardiff that we're looking at. Now, to bring us back down to earth with a bit of a bump, we do have some challenges. Mostly they're not geological, because although we don't have the deep sedimentary basins in North and Mid Wales that we have in South Wales, we do, of course, have the potential to use closed loop systems everywhere in Wales. And of course, as I said before, the main areas for geothermal potential in Wales coincide with where we have our main population centres. So that works out quite well. Our challenges tend to be similar, I think, to the rest of the UK. First of all, we probably could all agree that geothermal energy is best deployed as part of a heat network. And that's going to require a bit of a change in mindset, because the public tends to want to be in charge of their own electricity supply and heating supply. So I think there is a potential role there for social scientists to look at. I think as well, we've got to get the planners to move away from the easy wins, because when they do think heat networks, they tend to think more of air source or waste heat recovery. And we need to really get geothermal on their radar, which is, of course, why we're doing things like we are today. Then we come to permitting, which obviously needs to be underpinned by science, and right now isn't applied uniformly across the UK. So in Wales, we're currently waiting for the Mine Water Heat Access Agreement application process, which I'm told is due in a matter of months. I think England already have theirs, but we're still waiting. If you look at the permitting for open loop schemes, well, you would need to apply for a groundwater investigation consent and an abstraction licence, and usually an environmental permit to discharge, unless you qualify for an exemption, which is based on whether you are using heat or cooling or a balanced system, and how much water you're actually discharging. So it can be a little bit confusing. It's also quite costly as well. So we were stung by this when we installed the ground source heat pump in Grangetown, because we weren't expecting to need the environmental permit to discharge, as we're not actually obviously doing anything to the water other than removing 2 degrees Celsius. So it can come as a bit of a costly surprise as well, I think. And then, of course, if you look at closed loop systems, as I mentioned earlier, they're not regulated at all. So this means that we have very little idea of where these systems actually are, and that can, of course, lead to system interaction as people are installing them too close together. And then our final challenge really is that we have no specific geothermal policy or incentives in Wales, which I think is similar to other parts of the UK. And of course, whilst it is covered by the heat strategy, which aims to electrify heat, without having that geothermal specific policy, we don't have a support mechanism that can really help to de-risk the industry. And I think on that cheery note, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Ashley. It's great to see the activity in Wales, and yes, I agree. A lot of the challenges that we're all facing them together, aren't we, around the country? But thank you for that great summary. Okay, now I think we're moving on to Scotland. I'll hand over in a moment to Joanne. And just to clarify, Joanne, if you give us the nod, we can push the slides forward for you. So thank you very much. Just quickly to the audience, it's great to see so many of you here, and please feel free to add your Q&A, your questions to the questions function, and that we'll address them at the end of the presentations. Okay, over to you, Joanne. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. Good afternoon. I'm Joanne McDougall, the Scottish Government's Geothermal Programme Manager. Next slide, please, Sam. I took up this role in 2014, shortly after the Scottish Government published the findings of a study it had commissioned, which identified significant deep geothermal potential in Scotland's mine workings, hot sedimentary aquifers and hot rocks. Following publication of the findings, 2 stakeholder groups were set up to consider how the Scottish Government could support the development of a Scottish geothermal industry as an economically attractive and viable investment prospect. In response to a recommendation of one of the groups, the Scottish Government launched the Geothermal Energy Challenge Fund in 2015. The fund financed studies of the technical feasibility, financial viability and environmental sustainability of deep geothermal in 4 locations across Scotland. One of the 4 projects investigated a mine water resource, another a hot sedimentary aquifer, and 2 investigated the potential of hot rocks. It was hoped that a feasibility study would be the first step towards a more practical exploration of the geothermal resource in each of these locations. The focus was on not just locating the geothermal resource, but matching potential supply with long-term demand and protecting the environment at the same time. A lot was learned from these studies, even though none of them proceeded to a demonstrator project. 2 of them were unable to compete with existing heat sources in the area at that time. One of the projects was unable to identify sufficient local heat customers, and although the 4th one was commercially viable, it didn't progress further. Over the course of the last 10 years, the Scottish Government and Scotland's 3 economic development agencies, the enterprise agencies, have funded a number of other deep geothermal feasibility studies. But Scotland is still waiting for its first large-scale deep geothermal development. At the time of the Geothermal Energy Challenge Fund, Scotland had 2 small-scale geothermal mine water schemes, each of which had been operational for about 15 years. These were run by housing associations, one in the east of Scotland, the other in the west, and had been abstracting water from mine workings less than 200 metres underground. However, within about 18 months of each other, both housing associations replaced their geothermal heating systems with natural gas. This was done at the request of the tenants, who, after a number of years of problems with the heating systems, had lost confidence in them. I understand, though, that the issues were with the heating systems themselves and not the mine water resource. 10 years on, and the policy landscape is very different. There are a number of Scottish Government policies which are relevant to geothermal exploration and development in Scotland. Heating Scotland's homes, workplaces and other buildings causes around 20% of the country's emissions and is the 3rd largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland. The 4th National Planning Framework sets out a policy of no support for the exploration, development and production of fossil fuels, other than in exceptional circumstances aligned with national policy on energy. It does, however, recognise that the legacy infrastructure of our fossil fuel industries could be repurposed for decarbonisation, and includes a specific reference to mine water in this context. With effect from April 2024, new buildings in Scotland cannot have a fossil fuel gas boiler or oil boiler as the primary heating system, so developers are having to think about renewable heat options, such as geothermal. The Scottish Government's Heat and Building Strategy was published in 2021 and is a series of near-term actions and long-term commitments to put Scotland on the path to zero emissions from buildings. Shallow geothermal heating schemes using ground source heat pumps are not uncommon in Scotland, and heat networks will be fundamental to the delivery of geothermal to communities. Heat pumps and heat networks are 2 of the technologies which the Heat and Building Strategy focuses on as likely to be the most cost-effective zero emissions options for many buildings. The Scottish Government continues to support the deployment of heat networks through the Heat Networks Scotland Act, which will establish a new regulatory regime for heat networks in Scotland. The Act requires local authorities to carry out a review of potential areas for heat networks. Local heat and energy efficiency strategies are long-term plans for an entire local authority area to decarbonise heat and improve energy efficiency. They are at the heart of a place-based, locally led and tailored approach to the heat transition. They set out the significant opportunities for the development of heat networks across Scotland. And looking ahead, the Scottish Government has set out plans to introduce a Heat and Buildings Bill, which, amongst other things, will be designed to create investment opportunities for heat networks by encouraging non-domestic and especially public buildings to connect to these schemes. The Heat and Building Strategy acknowledges that deep geothermal is at a very early stage in Scotland, but that it could have a role to play in heat decarbonisation for some communities, and includes a commitment to continue to explore this potential. Next slide, please, Sam. There is a range of support available to those interested in Scotland's subsurface. Firstly, data. The Scotland Heat Map is a tool available to help stakeholders develop low-carbon proposals. It maps heat demand with heat supply and includes data from the British Geological Survey and the Mining Remediation Authority. Building on data from the Mining Remediation Authority, there is the Mine Water Geothermal Resource Atlas for Scotland, which was developed by a PhD researcher at the Universities of Strathclyde and Glasgow. The development of the atlas was partly funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, and the atlas identifies optimal locations for mine water geothermal development across 19 of Scotland's 32 local authorities. In her presentation, Ashley mentioned the Cardiff Observatory. The Glasgow Observatory is one of the other sites which form the British Geological Survey's UK Geoenergy Observatories programme. Data sets are regularly published on the Observatory's website, and the research and innovation infrastructure in Glasgow is flexible for investigations around heating, cooling and thermal storage in flooded disused coal mines, as well as monitoring environmental change in an urban setting. Within the last few weeks, the British Geological Survey has launched its UK geothermal platform. Again, Ashley mentioned that. Commissioned by the UK government, the platform provides national to local scale information on geothermal potential across shallow and deep technology options. It allows users to explore and assess the geothermal potential of an area and make more informed decisions. Moving on to financial support, there is a wide range of clean heat funding opportunities available from the Scottish Government and its delivery partners. Current opportunities include the Clean Energy Transition Partnership Programme, which is an international collaboration involving 30 countries and more than 50 funding agencies, supported through the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Programme. Scottish Enterprise is delivering the Clean Energy Transition Partnership Programme in Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government and Scotland's enterprise agencies. The 2025 Research and Innovation Funding Call is currently open to companies of all sizes and researchers within Scottish Enterprise and South of Scotland Enterprise areas to apply for a share of £3.5 million. The fund covers a number of modules, one of which is heating and cooling, such as geothermal. Scotland's Heat Network Support Unit and the Scottish Heat Network Fund provide support for large-scale heat network projects to Scottish local authorities and other public sector organisations. The Heat Network Support Unit also offers strategic support to help local authorities build on local heat and energy efficiency strategies, to develop a strategic and commercial approach to deploying large-scale heat networks in their areas. Another current source of funding which could help develop Scotland's geothermal capability is the Oil and Gas Transition Training Fund. This fund was recently launched and is a joint project between the UK Government and the Scottish Government and is delivered by Skills Development Scotland. The fund aims to support offshore oil and gas workers based in Aberdeen City or Aberdeenshire with funding for training to support them to build the skills required to work in Scotland's sustainable energy sectors. The relevance and potential transferability of skills from the oil and gas industry to the geothermal industry was the subject of a study commissioned by Scottish Enterprise in 2021. The study identified and mapped Scotland's oil and gas supply chain capability in drilling, subsurface modelling, corrosion mitigation, and data analytics. 220 Scottish oil and gas supply chain companies were identified with capabilities offering the potential for diversification into the geothermal supply chain. As well as data and financial support, guidance is also available for those interested in exploring Scotland's geothermal potential. The Scottish Government's regulatory guidance for deep geothermal projects was first published in 2016 in response to a recommendation of the stakeholder group set up to consider the regulatory framework for deep geothermal projects. The guidance was most recently updated in March 2024. There are no geothermal-specific licensing regimes in the UK, but there are a number of regulatory regimes which are relevant: planning, environmental protection, health and safety. The regulatory guidance outlines the regimes relevant in Scotland and provides links to detailed guides. In addition, the permission of the Mining Remediation Authority is required if coal mine workings are involved, and all projects require landowner permission regardless of the depth of drilling. This is because sections 43 and 44 of the 2015 Infrastructure Act do not apply in Scotland. This potential barrier to deep geothermal projects involving horizontal or directional drilling has been flagged to me by a stakeholder. I'd be interested to hear from any others who have opted not to undertake a deep geothermal project in Scotland due to the need to secure permission from all relevant landowners. In July 2024, in partnership with Scottish Enterprise, the Scottish Government published an introductory guide to waste heat recovery, which provides information about heat that is being wasted or not used to its full potential, and how to capture it and use it. One of the topics covered in the guide is mine water geothermal. Earlier this year, Scottish Enterprise published a series of clean heat fact sheets to help businesses understand the opportunities for joining the supply chain and supporting clean heat technologies in Scotland. The heat generation fact sheet explores how heat can be generated more efficiently with systems that use low emission or renewable energy sources. It focuses on the technologies and components used in clean heat generators for industry, businesses and homes. It includes geothermal drilling rigs, industrial and domestic heat pumps, plus emerging market opportunities in these areas within the UK and globally. Finally, as some of you participating in today's webinar will be aware, I issue a monthly email update to stakeholders. The update covers renewable energy and climate change related issues from the Scottish Government and other public bodies, such as legislation changes, clean heat financial support opportunities, stakeholder events, public consultations, and the publication of subsurface datasets. Anyone with an interest in being added to my distribution list, feel free to send me an email. My email address is on the slide. And with that, I will hand back to Anne, and happy to take questions in due course.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Joanne. And I highly recommend that email. So get in touch with Joanne to get on the list for that. It's a great summary. Also, we're going to be sharing Joanne's slides, and there are links behind all these points here. So we'll be sharing the slides after the meeting so you can read in a bit more depth about all these great resources that we've got in Scotland. Thank you very much, Joanne. That was great. And now, in our quick flight around the country, we're going to hand over to Sharon in Northern Ireland. Thanks very much, Sharon.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Clements. I look after geothermal policy in the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland. Today, I'm going to take you through Northern Ireland's journey in developing geothermal policy, what we've done, what we've learned, and where we're headed. This presentation focuses on policy development, lessons learned, and public engagement, but we're hoping very soon to publish the results of our geothermal demonstrator project. Technically challenging. You just press the button and it moves the slide on.
Actually, so, Sharon, sorry, if you just give Sam the nod, tell Sam he can forward the slides for you.
Okay, Sam, you're up, but not just yet. This slide sets out the department's journey on geothermal policy development. It began in 2020 with a call for evidence that for the first time introduced the idea that geothermal energy could contribute to decarbonising heating and cooling in Northern Ireland. Since then, we've built a strong foundation. GSNI's Geothermal Potential Report has made a strong case for government investment. We established the Geothermal Advisory Committee, which is made up of academics, industry and policymakers, and this continues to advise us and provide policy and technical advice as we move forward in our geothermal policy development. Research from Queen's University and Arab has shaped our understanding and informed our policy journey. In 2023, we launched our Geoenergy project, which is set out to demonstrate geothermal potential in Northern Ireland. Sam? And we've continued on our journey. The Geoenergy project has played a key role in gathering evidence for the development of fit-for-purpose policy. Ultimately, we will need new legislation to provide investment and resource, protect the resource and sustainability of the resource. Next slide. The Geoenergy project has played a key role in gathering evidence. It's helped us understand the regulatory barriers and gather the evidence needed to shape future policy. By combining technical investigations with public engagement, it's also been central to demonstrating our geothermal potential as we move forward and engaging stakeholders on our journey. Sam? The Geoenergy project had 4 main objectives: to assess the geothermal potential at Stormont and Greenmount, to showcase geothermal as a renewable energy source that supports decarbonisation and energy security, and to combine technical studies with public outreach to build awareness and garner support. And finally, and possibly the most important, to gather the evidence to understand regulatory and other barriers to deployment. This integrated approach ensured we collected the right data and built the community support. Sam, next slide, please. Geophysical surveys at Greenmount included 3 2D seismic lines, 19 magnetotelluric stations, 100 gravity measurement points. These data sets were used to map subsurface structures, supporting geological and geothermal interpretations. All data were integrated into a robust geological model to support geothermal well selection. We combine, next slide, Sam. We combine new geophysical data with historical surveys and borehole records to enhance model accuracy. Collaboration with GSNI and academic institutions helped to refine the model and reduce uncertainty. And this approach also identified key areas for future data collection and informed a planning application for a deep geothermal doublet. Next slide, please, Sam. At Stormont, we drilled and tested 5 boreholes. We did geophysical logging, pump testing, and thermal response testing. And that data was fed into the design and the feasibility study that confirmed that shallow geothermal systems and a heat network could meet heating demands for all the government buildings on that site. And that was despite uncovering very complex geology, which included limited Sherwood sandstone, which is what we were expecting, and significant Permian sequences. Next slide, Sam. The public outreach was a priority. So we focused on showcasing the technical side and engaging people in the process as we move forward. We also brought on board a Geoenergy Discovery Centre, which has reached over 250,000 people through events and school visits. Our website has had over 10,000 individuals accessing it, and we have had strong media coverage. We also developed VR headsets, educational resources, and the documentary, and our social media campaigns have had high engagement. Next slide, please. Since October 2023, the Geoenergy Discovery Centre has travelled 2,500 miles, visited 13 schools, or visiting 13 events and welcomed 40 schools. We've been visited by 4 government ministers, 1 US special envoy, 4 mayors, and it's been open at Stormont for 150 days and welcomed 500 visitors. We've completed hundreds of ecological surveys at Greenmount and Stormont, submitted 2 planning applications, and visited every council in Northern Ireland. Next slide, please, Sam. We've done a lot. We've been very busy. But it's equally important to reflect on what we've learned, both technically and strategically. Next slide, please, Sam. So in terms of technical insights, early and effective stakeholder engagement is critical for site access and public acceptance, and ultimately for engaging the planning system. Tailored geological investigations are essential because every site is different and you can't make any assumptions. And a multidisciplinary approach and continuous testing of those assumptions is vital to ensure continued delivery. Strong project and contract management ensures delivery and maintains value for money. Next slide, please. Our strategic challenges, we still face them. The regulatory uncertainty, limited drilling capacity and experience, geological complexity, and all of those roll in to make it the cost risks still relatively high. We need clearer planning regulations, more environmental data, and a low-cost way to de-risk drilling. Next slide, please, Sam. As a department, our next steps are clear in the shorter term. We're going to focus on developing proposals for a clear regulatory framework and acquiring more geological data. We also need to build industry capacity through training and to continue to promote public engagement. Proposals for a new grant scheme for domestic ground source heat pumps in Northern Ireland will help the sector, and public sector commitment to decarbonisation will help provide the data which will hopefully de-risk private investment. Next slide, please. And that's me. All our resources that Geoenergy produced are on our website. There's a QR code and the web address. And that's me.